Welcome to Plead the Cause, where we are pleading the cause of the orphaned and vulnerable children around the world and right here at home. I'm Tommy, the Director of Community Engagement for Heart of the Bride Ministries, and I'm joined today by Brian Chrisman, our Executive Director. And Brian, we have a special guest joining us on the podcast today. Would you please introduce your lowly bride?
Oh, thanks, Tommy. Yeah, well, you gave it away, man. Come on, you gotta let me say that. My lovely bride
My
is with
bad.
me today, and her favorite thing is to be on camera. So this is what she loves to do. This is my wife, Sonya. We've been married for almost 29 years now, and so Sonya, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
She's making her debut tonight in the podcast world. So
Yeah,
hey,
this is great too. I'm excited to hear you guys share this story. So we've been talking about adoption. You know, we interviewed Matt and kind of did an overview of adoption. We talked about the different types of adoption, and you guys did an international adoption. And so we're going to hear your story today. So we're excited to hear just your heart for it, what kind of led to it, and what the process was like. So first and foremost, growing up, you know, what were your thoughts about adoption? Was it something you were aware of or saw people do? Like, what was kind of your experience with that?
I don't really think I thought much about it.
I don't think I did either, honestly.
I can't remember even really, and I grew up in a small town in central Alabama. I can't even really remember like knowing someone and just going, oh, they were adopted, or
I'm thinking
that
the same
family
thing.
adopted.
I'm trying to think, but yeah, I don't believe that we had much exposure to that, or I didn't.
Yeah, I don't think that my family really talked about it much, or, you know, but I would say if I heard things about adoption, sometimes it was probably negative comments about it at times, you know, because I just don't think I was even really in a community that understood it well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't, I don't think you know, we hear like meet couples that are like, hey, when we met and we started talking about children, we talked about how many we were going to have biologically and how many we were going to adopt, and you know, and then, or we were going to adopt first, but we never talked about it.
Just never crossed
So
our minds.
this wasn't on your radar at
No.
early on in marriage either. Not just
At
growing up,
all.
but early on in marriage. Not something that was
Sonya had a goal for how many kids we were going to have, which was
4.
Yeah. And then we ended up having,
We had 5
biologically.
And then we adopted 1, and we have 6 now.
Yeah. So we overshot our goal, which was great, but no, adoption wasn't
overachievers.
Overachievers.
Yes.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so, you know, but adoption wasn't something we ever really talked about at all early on.
Not
Well,
early on.
So what was it? When was it that led to this discussion coming up and for you two to consider adoption?
Well, we've shared before, Chris Sonya's brother, Tony, is the founder of Heart of the Bride Ministries. And so, they led the way for us in a lot of different ways, sacrificial giving and things that we've shared about before on the podcast. But I would also say they were one of the leaders for us even in adoption, but they were amongst a group of people that we knew that were adopting. And we served in Northeast Alabama for a while and knew a family or two there that adopted, mostly internationally. I would say foster adopt was still something
not as much I'd heard of at that time.
Yeah. So we knew several families that had adopted internationally. Tony and Faith, of course, did that in 2013 or into 2014, adopted internationally from Ukraine. But for us, and I think for me personally, the journey really started in 2008. You know, I've shared the story of Julius before, the little boy that I held in 2008, my first trip to Kenya. You know, he just never really left my mind. I don't know that I thought adoption in 2008, but then when Sonya got to go in 2011, she met Julius. And so which one of us first mentioned?
I can't even remember, honestly. And it just seemed like a natural conversation when we talked about, how we would both be willing and open to do that, to to adopt him.
Yeah, at some point, so we can't pinpoint a date, somewhere around 2012 when we got to go back together. I think it was right before that, or right maybe while we were there.
Yeah.
We saw Julius again, and we began to say, hey, maybe God wants him to be a part of our family. And so really our first thoughts of adoption were to adopt from Kenya and to adopt Julius. But then Kenya closed international adoptions. So God kind of answered that prayer in a really...
Yeah, we were praying. I remember praying specifically, is he supposed to be part of our family, or is he supposed to be in Kenya for some other reason and not part of our family? And so God did answer that prayer.
Yeah.
We were saddened at the time,
but it kind of primed our hearts, that we had connected with a boy that wasn't one of ours biologically, because I'd never really thought of that, or that, I could connect with someone, a kid that deeply. But that's unique now. Most people aren't going to have met a child in another country and then feel led to adopt. But that is the way it happened for us and a few others that we know, especially missionaries that have served in other countries. But it did for us. And that was about the same time we had friends in Cape. We were living in Cape Girardeau by then, and they were adopting from China internationally, and in South Korea. So we knew several people adopting at that point. So it was it just had become at that point a little bit more a regular part of our vocabulary to talk about adoption. And so even when that kind of fell through then with Kenya, then we still had that on our hearts. And then right after that is when our family adopted from Ukraine, and then everything got kind of got put on hold when God called us to serve with Heart of the Bride, because then we were fundraising, we were moving and stuff like that. So in 2014 that got put on hold, and we didn't really think about it for a couple of years until 2016, and I guess was it Orphan Sunday or something specific? I just know it was October of 2016.
And we were just open to it, but yeah.
Yeah. And we left a church service, and I can't remember which one of us said it first, but one of us just said, should we start praying about adoption again? And we both said yes. Yeah. And so that's kind of what rekindled our hearts for it, to begin to pray about adopting again and to seek the Lord's will on it.
Yeah.
So after the thing with Kenya and them closing the adoption was still on your heart. Was it something you kind of thought this is going to happen at some point? Like you were determined that was a path you wanted to go?
It was just laid on our hearts, and it was like our family wasn't complete yet. So we just felt like we were supposed to adopt it. Then the question was, well, where?
Yeah, after Kenya closed, then it was like, okay, well, if it's not Kenya,
that seemed natural because we had been there and we'd fallen in love with different children there, but especially him. And so I think it was just a burden on our hearts at that point forward.
Okay, so as God is putting this back on your heart on this Sunday, and that Kenya had closed, what led you to look at China? What led you to adopt from China?
Well, I think first of all, we had several friends that adopted from China. So, that's, and we'll talk about this in a few minutes, when you start considering international adoption, the big questions, where, how, what do you do? Well, we had some people who led the way. And I think that was a big part of it early on. It was, hey, we know people who've done that, and they'll have good advice. Experience.
Yeah. Experience. Yeah.
And then, but I think the other too is that, and I'm going to go back to Tony and Faith, Sonya's brother and sister-in-law. I remember when they adopted from Ukraine, and he said, excuse me, he said, he said, we felt led to adopt from a place where children would be less likely to hear the gospel.
It was darkest spiritually.
Yeah. In Kenya, especially kids, this kid was in one of our homes, a Heart of the Bride home at that time. We knew Julius was hearing the gospel, and actually now I've seen pictures of him preaching. So we think we know why he was supposed to stay in Kenya now. We're just praying that he becomes a proclaimer of the gospel amongst the people of Kenya. but then we thought, so then naturally knowing people who'd adopted from China, we looked at that and said, well, that's obviously a place where
Very
people
dark.
is very dark,
Mm-hmm.
and people are not, kids are less likely to hear the gospel growing up in an orphanage there. And so, I mean, it was really pretty quick that it was, I mean, October of 2016, we felt kind of the renewed call, but I mean, it was like less than a month. We were looking at waiting children's list in China. So maybe a week or two.
Yeah.
But I'm not really good at keeping up with time,
With
and I
dates,
don't journal.
And I do feel like we had heard the need for boys to be adopted there because so many were adopting girls throughout because of the crisis of the one child, and then everybody wanted a boy to adopt. So people immediately started adopting girls, but we heard, well, there was a lot of boys that needed to be adopted. That was kind of being overlooked.
Especially with medical needs. Children in China, especially with medical needs, and then specifically boys, were not being adopted. And so there's a large number of boys actually in the orphanage system, way more than you would think, knowing the preference for boys in their culture through the one-child policy. But yeah. So that's what led us to China. And so we were focused. Yeah.
All right. So in that process, as you've kind of come to this place to determine it's definitely China, and we're going to adopt a boy. How did it get to you choosing your son? Like, what led to one specific child in all of China?
Yeah. And being completely open too, we should probably say this about why we adopted a boy. We knew about the need in China. At the same time, biologically, we'd had 4 girls and 1 boy. So we were kind of like,
and he was wanting a brother.
He needs a brother. So,
y'all were outnumbered, basically. Huh?
Right. We want to be completely open with you. Sometimes it's a very spiritual process. Sometimes
it's practical,
but it's practical too. And you're praying through this, and God says, "Hey, your son needs a brother." And so, let's be completely open about that. But so in China at the time, they don't allow this anymore. There were waiting child lists. You could actually go to an agency website and look through pictures of children who need families. So certain countries still allow that. China right now doesn't even allow international adoptions. It's COVID and international relations are tough. They're not really allowing that right now. But so we started looking through lists. Sonya was really looking through more lists than I was.
Yeah, at home, and just looking at these different children and praying over just how is God going to show us this?
Yeah, and to be clear, all of them have medical needs. Every one of them. That is going to be the majority of children in the Chinese orphanage system. So we did look at one profile. This was probably the toughest decision we've made, one of the toughest ever. They sent us, they send you the profile, or at least back then they would, and you would have a
whole week
to pray through it, kind of research their needs. And so we've been blessed with a large number of doctor friends. And so, and my members of my family are in the medical profession. So we just sent, all of that information out to people to get advice. But what we determined was his medical need was something we could not treat in our local area. And,
or anywhere close,
or anywhere even close. And in fact, one of our staff members at Heart of the Bride had a grandchild with a similar medical need, and her children were moving to Dallas to seek treatment for their child. So we kind of knew fairly soon, within a few days, that, if we adopted this child, it would just be an incredible challenge to get the treatment they needed. And at that point, this was before COVID. Heart of the Bride we weren't even really equipped for online work at all. And we really need to be here near the home office. So we had to say no to him. And that was really, really hard. That's harder than I thought it would be. And we have actually kept up with him online. We've seen some videos that they've posted, and he's doing really well. So we've really continued to pray for him, but off and on. But yeah, see that he's doing well. So anything you want to add to that?
Just I agree. It was a hard decision, and then it was kind of like, well, what do we do next? We don't want to just. Do you start looking right away, or do you give it some time when you've had to say no to someone? So that was a challenge even to start the looking process again.
Yeah. But Sonya was doing it. So Sonya, on a Wednesday night said, hey, I found this little boy. And at that point, his name was Lee, Li, on the website. And so we looked at him and his picture, read through the information they give you. They give you some of the medical needs on the website.
And a little personality things too.
Oh, yeah.
A little bit about their personality and just very vague though.
Yeah. And so we said, let's get some more information on this guy. So Sonya called the next morning, and this is what she was told.
Yeah. Okay. So they were very vague because I don't think they want to influence you, like, come and get this boy. But they told me that this child was going to need a decision by the end of by 4 o'clock. Well, we figured out it was 4 o'clock because their time zone was different than ours.
Yeah.
So, like, because of the particular situation.
So his profile was going to have to be returned to China. They're only allowed to be in the waiting child system for so long. And so it was due back the next day. And so instead of a week, they said, you really just have till the end of the day.
Till the end of the day, which really wasn't a full day for us even. And so we immediately
Sonya called me, said, hey, this is the situation. They just emailed it to me. I'm going to send it to you.
Felt this urgency to start pursuing just all of our doctor friends. And like Brian was talking about, the friends that we have that would have knowledge on his particular medical condition.
Yeah. But I'll have to be honest. I think in the moment, I think we both kind of felt like, well, this is our son. Like, this is an odd situation, but it's not, it didn't take God by surprise. And so, we did our due diligence, right? We sent the file out. We asked people specific questions.
And obviously praying all day.
All day. And I was at the office, which is about 35 minutes from where we lived then. And so.
And I just remember I was driving around and just praying while I was driving and just,
the whole office was praying. I was sharing with our
people.
office, hey, here's what's going on. I need you guys to be praying.
Yeah, calling different people to be in prayer with us over this.
So by the end of the day, by 4 o'clock, we felt led to call them and say, yes.
And so when I called back, it was really neat because the story behind it was when we told them yes, when we said, yes, we want to pursue adopting Lee, that they said, oh, we've just been wondering what the Christmans were going to say. We've just been talking about it and praying about it all day because we were about to enter his name to where he wouldn't have been a possibility after this.
Yeah,
my understanding.
Once their file was put back into the system, the Chinese system, like, it's gone. Like, it's incredibly hard to find. You can't pull it back. Even though the paperwork may have still been sitting on their desk, the ability to grab that and say, this is a child paired with people would have been gone. So. And
what was really funny, because our family, if you know our family, we like coffee, and that's just something about us, and our children do, and soon Daniel Lee would come to like coffee. But the thing about it is that they were about to enter him, but what they said is, you wouldn't believe we had a broken coffee pot. And they said, we were about to enter him, but we were kind of being a little, and they called themselves, I don't know if they said that we were kind of being bad, or we were just because we really wanted our coffee. And so we sent the girl that was supposed to be doing the entering out for Starbucks because she needed to get us coffee because our coffee pot had broken. And so
you called while she was gone,
and he was literally about to be gone. And as far as our grasp.
So when she got back and looked at the stack of files, Daniel is what we named him when we adopted him. Daniel's file was next.
Was on the top.
The broken coffee pot prevented her from, because she agreed to go get coffee, prevented her from entering his file and actually saved him till Sonya called. And then they pulled it out and waited for us to give the answer. And then
they waited for us to give the answer, but they said, we're all on pins and needles, wanting to know and hoping y'all would say yes. And so they just they were rejoicing in that office because it was just such a crazy it was just such a crazy situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we think it's pretty cool that God used coffee and a broken, coffee pot. Yeah. To save, our son for us and to lead us, to adopt Daniel. So, it's pretty awesome. I mean, God works in mysterious ways and he can use coffee. And so he did. Yeah. And we just think that's a really cool part of his story because it does show the providence of God at work in this. There are a lot of practical decisions you have to make, and there was with saying no to the first boy because it just was. It was like, okay, medically, we cannot help him here. But then when you look at Daniel, it's not only God speaking.
Such a sense of urgency, which always is not always the case when God is calling you to do something, but when He is, and it's an urgent situation, just that ability to answer yes by the end of that day wasn't easy. No, it was an easy yes.
Yeah. And if we had waited one more day to call, a few hours, if the coffee pot hadn't broken,
I think about that a lot. Just if I had waited. And I remember Brian leaving for work that morning, and we were like, "Should we go ahead and call?" And he was like, "Go ahead and call and see if that's a possibility if he's still available." And I remember as soon as he had agreed with me on that, then I called right away, and I didn't know how the time restraint or the time sensitive matter that was under calling right then. But God had me called in. So that's just really, really a cool part of his story.
These are the really cool parts of stories like this, when you get to see the providence of God and his sovereign will unfold, and you get to, as you're making decisions on this side, you get to hear all that happened on the other side that made this happen. And that could have only been God's hand at work. For that to happen at that time, with his name being next. So that's such a testament to God's sovereign hand and how he accomplishes his will.
Absolutely. In some really cool ways. Shows you that God is still at work in this world, right? Sometimes we get distracted. We don't see that.
He's always working.
If you're watching, he's always working. And he was that day for sure. So we saw it.
We cut it
immediately
close,
knew it.
We didn't know we were cutting it close.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly. And, Brian, we've talked before about the Israelites and Joshua and setting up the stones, as memorials for them to give thanks to God, but also to look at the stones to remember back to the times of God's faithfulness. And that's what these are. These are those stack of stone moments to look back and remember the next time you're facing something like God has shown himself faithful over and over again.
Absolutely. And to remember too that God speaks, and you've got to be, as we've talked about in the office this year, you've got to be watching for God to speak, and he's going to speak in a number of ways, right? He was speaking in our hearts. He was obviously leading us through the Holy Spirit. He was speaking to us through other believers as we were consulting them about, about his medical needs and what we would need to do and how we could do it. And then it's pretty cool. One of the doctor friends we had, they'd adopted a child with a almost identical medical needs. So, and he's a believer, and they were giving us advice. And then at the same time, he was working through circumstances on the other side, to lead us and to prevent Daniel from being, processed out. And so God speaks in a number of ways. And so he still works in this world. He still speaks. And so, it's a testimony to us.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is actually going to be part 1 of your story. We have more that we want everybody to come back next week for. So what we're going to do is, as we've heard leading up here to this part where God intervened to let Daniel be adopted by you guys, next episode we're going to talk about just a little bit about the logistics of that process of adopting from China, adopting overseas, and what some of the difficulties were that you faced during that process, and then what it was like bringing him home, and what it's been like since he's been here and been a part of your family. And so we're excited to hear kind of the rest of the story. We'll play a little Paul Harvey next, come back for the rest of the story. Yeah. And so we're excited to hear that. So Thank you for sharing this first part. I hope people are encouraged by your guys' love and commitment to adopt, and for God's faithfulness and how he made it happen and how the process went and what he did to intervene for Daniel to be a part of your family. And so what we want to do is just encourage you all who are watching this, subscribe to the channel. That way you can get updates whenever we have new episodes, including next week's where you get the rest of the story. Hit that bell so you can be notified. And then leave a comment. This just helps the algorithm get this video out to more people so that they can be encouraged by stories like this as well. Share it with your friends. If you are wanting to do audio only or have a friend who doesn't really do YouTube, then you can direct them to our podcast channels on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can also check out our website, heartofthebride.org, where you can hear more about how we're working with adoption care, even with the adoption grant, and then all that we do with foster care and with overseas orphans as well. There's a lot that you can be a part of in engaging with us, praying with us, coming alongside us. And we'd love to share with you some opportunities of how you can get involved. You can email Brian. Brian, I'm going to throw your email out there.
Do it.
Brian, yeah, I, not Y, Brian at heartofthebride.org. He's the executive director. He would love to talk with you about opportunities to get involved. You can email me as well, Tommy at heartofthebride.org. But check out the website.
Yeah.
And
or if
Brian
you have questions about adoption, hey, if you're watching this, you have questions about adoption, email me or any one of us, and we'll be happy to talk to you about those things as well. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, what better than to hear from someone who's been through it, and we're thankful to have, a couple personal testimonies right within our work family to share, both from a local and from an international adoption. And we'll get to hear the local adoption story actually later on this month. And so we're excited to continue to share these stories. So yeah, definitely reach out to us. We have people who would love to walk with you along that process and just give you some more info. But Brian and Sonya, thank you for sharing part one. We're excited to stay and go ahead and discuss part two that we will share next week. So thank you guys for joining us. Sonya, thank you for making your debut. You did great.
Thank you.
Good job.
Yeah. So you'll be a seasoned pro for the next episode.
Okay.
All right. We'll see y'all again soon to finish up the adoption story. And thank you for joining us as we plead the cause for the orphaned and vulnerable children around the world.